Hi, and welcome back to Good Distinctions, where good distinctions are the spice of life. My name is Will Wright, and I'm your host. Joining me today is Kallie Fell. Kallie, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here and to have an opportunity to talk with you and your listeners.
Well, it's wonderful to have you. So the main reason that I asked you on today was to talk about the Detransition Diaries, written by yourself and your co-author, Jennifer Lahl. And this is uh, sort of a follow-up to a documentary that you all produced as well. But before we get into that, who are you?
That's a good question. I'm a lot of things. No, I am the executive director of a nonprofit called the Center for Bioethics and Culture Network. We are an educational nonprofit that really exists to educate and inform members of the public, thought leaders, lawmakers, and others on ethical issues that really affect our humanity, especially in the healthcare, biomedical research, and biotechnological advancement. We bring together diverse voices in all those fields across the spectrum of human experience. And we really want to address critical questions that affect the most vulnerable among us. And those often are women and children, which we'll talk about a little bit today. I'm also a perinatal nurse as well, part-time. So very busy and love the work that I do.
Fantastic. And I was telling you before the show, my parents were both nurses, are nurses, and my wife's a nurse practitioner. So I'm surrounded by nurses. I love nurses. And I think that absolutely comes through in the book. The sensitivity that nurses have just sort of in their training about approaching the person in front of them, not to knock on doctors, but there's sort of a stereotype for a reason that doctors see so many people, they just blow in and say, all right, here's what's wrong with you. Here's what we're going to do about it and move on. Whereas nurses are more by the job, more into caring and compassion and nurturing.
Sure.
And so that's, I think, very important contextually to kind of see how a lot of these things flesh out in the book. So just to give the listeners a snapshot, it starts with a couple of chapters on the rise of gender affirmation movement and lessons not learned from medical abuses of the past. And I know this was written mostly by your co-author, and so we won't spend too much time on it, but I do want to point it out just so that those who are listening, first of all, the book is from Ignatius Press. It looks awesome.
I love the cover.
The cover's amazing. This image doesn't do it very well on my camera, but it's a pretty book. Not often do I say that I like the cover a lot, but it's really cool. It's got like this bowl. I can't remember what this Japanese art form is, but
It starts with a K, and I'm also blanking on it.
the words that's coming to mind is absolutely not the right word. So we'll move on. It's this cool Japanese art form where they take broken things and they fix it by putting gold in the seams, which is kind of neat. So anyway, it's a very nice looking book. But besides that, the first couple of chapters go through this historical sort of walk through how did we get where we are. So super important. I would highly recommend that everyone who's listening go buy this book. It's very timely, very important. But then the remaining chapters, there's a couple chapters at the end about addressing why the trend is higher among adolescent girls and how the damage is lasting and irreversible. And then sort of how do we move towards ending this scourge. But the middle chapters, and that's what I want to talk to you about, is stories. It's people's personal experiences about navigating these horrendous situations. And I wanted to say shark-infested waters, but then, you know, I know there's a lot of predatory folks, but it seemed to me as I was reading it, there's a lot of people who are just closing their eyes.
Yeah.
It's not so much that they're out to ruin people's lives. They might even have good intentions, but the things that they're doing are just not helping. In fact, they might be making things much, much worse. So I'm going to be quiet now, and I'm going to let you talk.
Well, I think you bring up a good point just as nurses too, like we have the opportunity to spend more time with people than physicians typically do, and we're awarded that opportunity in various settings. And I think that's what's kind of stands out about book too. This book comes after 2 movies and before the third in a trilogy on this topic. And so the nice thing about books like nurses is it's an opportunity to have more time. We get to dive deeper into, like you said, the history of how this is, why this happened, the history of medical abuses in the past. We get time to kind of set the stage. And then we get the time to expand on stories that we already have introduced in the films or will introduce in the third film in a way that books only can, right? You can only watch a movie for so long, but books have this ability to expand on a story. And so that's what we do. And that's, we have 7 stories in the book, all wonderful stories. Almost all the stories actually can be found in the films. I do stand corrected. There are a couple of stories that aren't in the films that are in the book, again, because we have that opportunity, that time. And then, of course, wrapping it up with a key question of where are we going and how do we end this?
So what, you put it in the book, I'll find the quote because I think it's a funny beginning. Let me see. The very first words of the introduction. We are nurses who happen to make movies. So how? I mean, how did you go from being a nurse to making movies?
That's a really good question. And, you know, I'm not actually entirely sure of Jennifer's full story. I know that she was a nurse and then went back to school and has a degree, advanced degree in bioethics, and started this nonprofit. And, you know, I do think people like movies. That's one way we learn really well visually. And so she started creating documentary films in the space of third-party reproduction and other bioethical issues. And, you know, to be honest, to backtrack a little bit, or to jump ahead actually a little bit, we weren't really looking to enter into the space of the gender ideology movement. It was a shark infested waters. It's very high cancel culture risk. Wasn't something we were sure was super that we needed to get into. But when we found out that children were being rendered infertile by these treatments, quotes for those who aren't watching, that's when we kind of were like, okay, nope, we have to enter into this space. We don't have a decision. We need to do this. And so the way we did it was through the way we always had filmmaking. The Center for Bioethics and Culture Network has now 11 documentary films, all in the space of bioethics. 3 of them are a trilogy in the medical transitioning or gender ideology space. The first one came out in the height of the global pandemic, called Transmission, What's the Rush to Reassign Gender? And that one focuses on children, why we are rushing to do this, because we wanted to know, why are we rushing to chop off healthy body parts and render children infertile, children who cannot give what we would say informed consent. And then we really found that people were resonating with the parents in the film and also the couple of detransitioners we had. And at the time, again, you didn't hear much from detransitioners. They weren't on Reddit. They weren't on Twitter. They weren't on YouTube telling their story. They were being really vilified. And they were kind of hard to find, to be honest. But people wanted to hear from them. So we decided to create a second film titled The Detransition Diaries. And that film focused on girls because what we were seeing was this really high trend in females, young girls. So that film focuses on the story of 3 women. It's an all-women cast, women professionals as well that we talk to. And we get their stories. And then while we were making that film, that's when Ignatius Press reached out to us and asked us if we would be interested in creating it into a book. True to our nature, why not? We felt like it was an opportunity to expand on what we'd already said and presented in the films. So we started writing the book, and in the middle of writing the book, the parents reached out to us and said, hang on, this isn't just happening in our girls, this is happening in boys too. Can we have a third film? And they really provided the support for us financially and otherwise to be able to create a third film, which is called The Lost Boys Searching for Manhood, that just came out in January this year. It's already March, which is crazy. That's why I was taking a second. It came out in January this year. And then Ignatius Press found out we were doing a film on boys. So they said, oh, please include a couple of the boys' stories. So we did that. Anyway, all of this to say we've been very busy since about 2019, 2020 in this space. And that's kind of how the three, and all of our films are found free on YouTube at CBC-Network. So people can go watch them. Again, they won't be getting quite the full stories as we can expand on them in the book, but there are other people who are in the films that aren't in the book and vice versa. I switched to answer your question and became a filmmaker because I actually saw Jennifer speak at a conference, and she was probably the only person I'd ever heard that was willing to talk about these bioethical issues in a way that was both sensitive and accurate. She wasn't afraid to face these issues head on. And I was like, I want to work with her. I want to do that. So I started out at the Center for Bioethics and Culture as just a volunteer writer, just to get to know the organization, get to know her, and then have been with the organization for many years now, and then now the executive director. But I still can't let nursing go. So I still do that part-time. But I also went to film school for a little bit of a stint. So again, I'm like kind of this jack of all trades. So it all kind of worked out for me to be here.
Well, and one of the things that I noticed in the book is that it's published by Ignatius Press, but this is not a Catholic book in the sense that it is something that's accessible to anyone and everyone. The arguments don't hinge on even theism. It's right. Just, these are the facts. This is what the human person is. And so I would love to hear you speak more about that, because I think sometimes people sort of just assume that if it's from Ignatius Press, then it's obviously a Catholic book, and therefore you're going to be bashed over the head with Catholicism. Or, I mean, the same thing in the pro-life space or gender ideology space. It's all just Catholics talking about what they believe, and so if you don't believe in Catholicism, you can just tune it out.
Right.
So what would you say to those folks who are listening?
Yeah, well, I want to say that Ignatius Press was excellent to work with for this process because, yes, they are rooted in Catholicism. Neither Jennifer and I are, but they did an excellent job of allowing the stories to tell themselves and without pressure of interjecting any religion into it. These are just the human stories. This is what it is. This is an account for what it is. This is a testimony, right? And you can't change that. And so it was just wonderful to work with them because there was no pressure either way to modify, not that we would have, obviously, but we were able to keep the integrity of the stories. We were able to present it in a way that was nonpartisan, or, there really is no religion or politics in the book at all.
No.
And something we're finding too, is that in this space, this ideology, we work with all kinds of people. I work with very religious people. I work with people who are absolutely atheists, and work with, present the material to and talk to, and we're kind of all on the same page in this space. And it's really lovely to see. And it's interesting, even in states like California, you'll see people across the aisle, so to speak, agreeing on this one issue. And so it's really not an issue of religion or politics. It's an ethical issue of, should we be doing experimental procedures on children that are permanent? And do children have the capacity to do so? And by, again, looking back at where ways we have failed in medicine, like lobotomy, etc., forced sterilizations, we can see that that wasn't right. And so I think no matter where you are on the religious or political spectrum, you want to be on the right side of history here, because eventually the tides are going to change and they're going to realize this was a huge mistake. And where were you, regardless of what you might believe.
And feel free to answer this next question or not, but just in your own opinion, do you think that adults could consent to these sorts of things? Because a lot of things, this is something that just came to my head as you were talking, and as I'm reading the book, I know that there's a lot of emphasis on children not being able to consent to these things that have lasting repercussions. Parents are usually not informed. And I know from some of the stories, like therapists will, the gender affirming part, that's it. You say, here's what I think. And then the therapist will respond, okie doke. Well, that's terrible medicine, first of all.
Yeah.
Never, in no other sphere is the diagnostic criteria, you can say whatever you want, and we'll just say, sure, let's go for it. But when we're talking about cross-sex hormones and chopping off perfectly good body parts and all these other things, it seems to me like that's a problem primarily. I mean, intuitively, immediately, we can all say, hopefully, that this is a bad thing for kids who absolutely can't consent. But if we're saying that gender dysphoria, for example, is actually a mental health issue, then how does that hamper consent? I mean, this is not my area. I have no idea. I'm just trying to piece this together as a layperson in the subject. So anyway, take it wherever you like.
You piece it together well. First and foremost, you're right. Hopefully people can get on board. But the thing is we can't. We still have people who think that this is okay in children. So that's where kind of my stick is in the sand.
Yeah. No,
but also, when we think about adults, there are several things that come to mind. And first is the quote from Megan Murphy in one of our films that says, gender, we don't need gender for anything. Gender used to be this term that we used to be polite. We didn't want to say the word sex when we talked about male or female, so we used gender. But we don't need gender for anything. Dress how you want. Wear whatever clothes you want. Paint your nails if you're a guy. Wear your makeup. I don't really care. What I do care about is the idea that we are living in a time and space where you cannot say that male and female are undeniably, categorically true. Like you are either male or female. That I have a problem with. I have a problem with, yes, this patient-led medicine in both in the mental health world and not. Nowhere else do we see this. We don't see a woman who's struggling with an eating disorder going to her therapist and her therapist confirming that, yes, indeed, you are too fat. Yeah. What you think about your body is 100% true. So I have a problem with that, whether that's in the adult population or the child population. I think medicine has gone away from its duty to do no harm. We do not typically allow people who don't have cancer to take chemotherapy drugs, right? We don't. So this idea that a man thinks that he should be a woman and how he should do that is by taking medication that he does not need or have surgery that he does not need, I do have a problem with. I think doctors should be able to say no without consequence for not treating that patient. So that being said, I do have a problem with it. And it just has invaded culture in every space. So yeah, that's I agree that adults we have this capacity more to consent, so to speak, but whether or not it should be permissible and allowable.
Well, a lot of people will make the argument that they say, well, it's my body, I can do with it what I like. And that argument
doesn't stand anywhere else. You cannot sell your organs. You cannot sell your body into slavery. Like that argument actually doesn't exist.
Well, and we sort of intuitively agree that there's certain things that are off the table. I mean, to use another example from what you said, if you have a perfectly good body part, you don't chop it off, period. It doesn't matter what the context is. No one would say, this is a good idea. And another theme from the book is getting back to the Hippocratic Oath of doing no harm and actually meaning that. Right. One of my friends is a pediatrician, and I asked him one time, he went to UNC Chapel Hill for med school, where we went to undergrad together. And I asked him, I was like, you all take the Hippocratic Oath, right? And he said, it's a modified version. Like, what? Like, this is one of the best med schools in the country.
Every school does like their own Hippocratic Oath now, or a version of it. Yeah.
It boggles the mind. The other thing that boggles the mind is that we can't agree that there are only two sexes. I mean, how do you navigate that? I mean, I'm sure that comes up with the center. Like, this is a scientific reality. But there's a lot of providers and a lot of people who are working in medicine and in psychiatry that say, oh, well, you know, gender ideology, I buy into that. Sex is not useful, right? The sort of sex assigned at birth, quote unquote. Whatever the hell that means. Like, it doesn't make any sense.
Spectrum. Sex is a spectrum. You can
right. I mean, and when they bring up these sort of oddities like hermaphroditism and saying, well, you know, some people have XXY, and I've always been taught to never make rules out of exceptions, and so I tend to like stay there.
But those are intersex conditions. Those are not completely different sexes. We don't say that someone with an XXY is a completely different sex. They're still, you know, male or female. Their chromosomes have abnormalities, and they're called intersex, but that's not a completely different category. Colin Wright has, he's an evolutionary biologist who was canceled for this. He's in our first film, and I've worked a lot with him. He's a very smart individual. I would encourage anyone who has questions about these intersex conditions, go look up Colin Wright and the material that he's written on this. It's outstanding. It clarifies it 100%. And, you know, again, for those listeners who might be believers, he is an evolutionary biologist. I do believe he's an atheist, but again, facts are facts. You know, you're either male or female.
Well, I don't want to listen to him then. I'm just kidding.
But he's outstanding in really explaining that to people. And so I recommend your listeners go to him and read his material if they have questions about that.
Excellent.
But yeah, those are right. And we're not just seeing it like in the mental health. I mean, we are erasing women from even like the labor and delivery unit. Like we say birth person, men can have babies. It's like, I just can't believe that in 2024, if someone would have told me 5 years ago that I would be defending biological reality, it would have blown my mind. Yeah. And here we are.
I teach high school at a Catholic high school near me, and I asked in religion class one day, it's a vocations class, so we're looking at like, what are you going to do with your life? Are you going to be married or not married or whatever? And I asked the class one time, I said, what do you all think about modern day feminism versus gender ideology? And that's all I said. I didn't say anything else. And they talked for like 25 minutes, mostly these two girls, just like almost yelling, like they were screaming. They were like so upset at basically what you're saying, the erasure of women, that like these women that came before them didn't work so hard for this giant guy with a penis to win a women's swim competition. And they're like going on and on and on. And I'm just sitting up there like, Inside, I'm going, yes.
I know.
There's hope for the next generation.
You're telling me there are children who haven't bought into this, and I'm getting really excited.
Yeah, no, it was phenomenal. I was like, this is great. Keep going. Good. It just shows like we're not the norm, obviously. But there are young people that can use their brains and come to understand what is true about reality. And this is something we try really hard to do. And like I was joking about, Colin Wright being an atheist. I'm not going to listen to him. But we have 4 years of religion classes, but we also have 4 years of ethics classes apart from that, where we're just trying to get them to think clearly and think for themselves and think critically and ask questions. And it's, I would say to anybody who's listening, like especially Catholics who are listening, because obviously this is a Catholic podcast, so there's a lot of Catholics listening, but if you don't read people who aren't Catholic simply because they're not Catholic, why? Like, there's no reason to do that, because the Catholic Church actually officially there's a long line of this. There is no competition between faith and reason properly understood. That's like one of the hallmarks of Catholicism, is that all truth is God's truth. And therefore, if it's true, if it's real, if it's in reality, then we should listen. And there's going to be people who have expertise that I don't have. I am not, I was saying, I was joking before we started recording. My parents are both nurses. My wife's a nurse practitioner. I'm surrounded by nurses. I wanted nothing to do with science. I like learning about it from a popular level, but I was much more into philosophy and theology and history. And great, I can do that. And all the evolutionary biologists can do their thing. And then I like to listen to them and get the boiled down synthesis of, like, once it gets past all the hard research, they can give me what they actually found. And as long as they're people who are trying to think clearly, I mean, that's great. And that's how we can support one another. But I think intuitively, when we see things like, well, there's more than two sexes, or gender is a spectrum, you have to be trained to believe that. I mean, that's not something that comes from critical thinking. That comes from indoctrination. And it's, I had that happen to me. I like I said, I went to UNC Chapel Hill, and a great school. I loved my time there. But within the first 2 weeks, I was told the difference between sex and gender outside of class. It was just by someone who was an upperclassman, probably through the campus Y, that was just trying to push this these ideas. And that was in 2009. So, you know,
really,
it's now 15 years later, and this stuff is doctrine now. I mean, forget about theories.
Right.
So
I'm
how do we?
Actually, I'm interested in you talk about, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I'm interested, you talk about you have a vocational class. And I just found it very interesting when researching for the book and the films, that these children, and you could say even up to high school, are asked before they start, puberty blockers or cross-sex hormones, their plans for family building. And do they want to do fertility preservation, which by itself is extremely experimental and also unfounded, doesn't work well. But they're asked about fertility preservation. And I'm just wondering, how many in your class, if you're talking about what you want to be when you grow up, your family, how many of them know for certainty what kind of family they want to have, how many children they want to have, if they want to adopt, if they want to have biological children, if they don't want to have children at all. And that's something that I guess I want listeners to understand, is they're asking children those types of things. Like, can you know at 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, how many children you want and what you want your family to look like? And that's what's really depressing to me about this is, and some of the girls in the story, Grace and others, talk about how they aren't sure about their fertility after being on hormones. And, that to me is devastating. Or once you chop off your breasts, you cannot breastfeed your children. Yeah. That is huge. That is huge.
It's tragic. I mean, it made me sad to think about the girl that had the double mastectomy and then wanting to get pregnant. And I'm thinking, man, to not even have that option of breastfeeding and making that connection with your child is just so sad.
And not just a connection, which is helpful, right? That's studies show us that is healthy for both the infant and the mother, that attachment, that should not be minimized. But also, you're missing out on all of the wonderful health benefits beyond that for your baby. Less likely to get diabetes, less likely to be obese, all of the things that studies show us that breastfeeding is great for your child. And not being able to do that.
That's a great point. I was speaking with a bioethicist a couple weeks ago. For those listening, that episode probably has already come out. But anyway, one of the things she brought up was the fact that colostrum is so beneficial. And I think I heard it on a different podcast, just as you say, not just immediately. These are lifetime things that even if where she took it was, I said, what if we could make artificial wombs. We were just like hypothetically thinking about stuff like that. And she said, well, I don't think it would work anyway. Because despite the fact that if you could actually keep the child alive in this artificial womb, there's nothing saying that it would actually work, because there might be like failure to thrive or something like this. Like there's so many things that we don't know. Even if we could figure them out, you can't synthetically substitute humanity.
Right.
So it's like it's one thing to have like an extraordinary medical intervention that might prolong life or cure a disease like later in life, but sort of messing with these things that are so part and parcel of who it is to be a human, and what it is to be a woman, especially, like way out of my depth. I can talk about it, but I obviously haven't been through it. But there's a, like, watching my wife be pregnant and then give birth, and then the connection with our children, like, it's so different than my experience, and just infinitely meaningful. I don't know a better word, like just the connection that she has with my children. I love my children so much, and I want to protect them, and I want to train them and rear them as best I can to be good men. But she's like on another level with the womanly care and concern and nurturing and empathy and caring about their emotional state. Like, it's beautiful. And I wonder, like you said, how many of these poor kids who have gone through this will either not be able to experience that, not even have the option to experience motherhood, or fatherhood for that matter, for the boys. Like, it's just, it is awful. And to sort of piggyback on what you were saying, in the vocations class, like, I asked them that question because we obviously talk about marriage and family and all these things. And I asked them, how many kids do you want? And they're like, I don't know. I'm just trying to graduate, man. I'm like, fair enough. So like, they have no discernment. And these are 16-year-olds. Mm-hmm. So it's quite horrendous. But I would say, like, it's not even just in the gender ideology space. I'd love to get your thoughts on this too. I've been thinking about this as it relates to like artificial birth control and the effects it has on future fertility and hormones and all these things. So, I mean, I see an analog there in the sense that providers are giving this, like, say someone has irregular painful periods, they'll give them artificial birth control, but it causes all these other problems. So it's like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet hole. Yeah.
The reproductive industry is, I'll call it, they have a problem with doing that. They don't address the problem, they address a symptom of the problem, whether that's infertility or the painful period for a young girl. We have a long history of putting Band-Aids on things, like even in the IVF world, rather than figure out maybe what's causing the infertility. Instead, we're just going to get you a baby the fastest way we know how. And so I actually, on our board, and we work with medical doctors who do different types of care, like NAPRO technology and those types of things, which listeners can go find. I have my own podcast, Venus Rising, where I talk with those doctors in detail about awesome. That kind of care. And so I agree. I think we have to be thinking about that, especially in girls. And I think that there is a real deficit to treating the actual problem and not just the symptom.
Well, and I'm sure there's a lot of money changing hands, and I don't like to be cynical, but I feel like this one's pretty cut and dry. There's a lot of people getting very rich.
Both worlds: gender ideology, transition medicine, and reproductive medicine. And if you just listen to the last 10 minutes of our talk, one feeds into the other, right? So if you render a child infertile, you are signing them up for fertility treatment later in life. You are signing them up for needing egg freezing, preservation of their sperm and their egg. You are signing them up. So you are signing, and those are two huge money makers. There is money to be had in the hormones that are prescribed. There's money to be had in the surgeries that are being done. And not only that, I like to harp on this point a lot too. If people have heard me talk before too. Once a person has gone down the path of medical transitioning, they are signing themselves up to become patients for life. You don't just have a one-time prescription, one-time surgery. This is an ongoing, life-changing, impacting thing that requires medical follow-up after medical follow-up. Many of the detransitioners that we interview have complications and other issues that they will forever be patients. And that's hard because they've been so harmed by medicine that it's hard for them to want to return to a field that's really betrayed them and didn't have their interest in heart, whether that's on purpose, like sharks in the water, or if that was because they just had blindfolds on and they'd refused to put their neck out to say, no, I don't think that you need that. So you're right. There's a lot of money to be had in both of these industries.
Well, and one of the stories, I can't remember which one. I think it was one of the first two. It was a girl who was put on testosterone, and she became very, very angry, rageful, all these different problems that led to self-harm, being hospitalized twice, if I remember right from reading. And no one thought to look at the fact that she's taking testosterone shots at the highest dose, mind you, because the provider said, well, how much do you want? And she said, all of it. I mean, I can't even talk. I'm actually really irritated even thinking about it, because it's like, it's beyond the pale where you just don't do that. Like, I'm not in medicine, but that just seems like common sense, that you're the expert. You don't get, like, if one of my kids came up to me at school and said, I think this is what happened in history in a unit we hadn't covered yet, I'd be like, based on what? I'm just feeling that. I'm like, well, that's stupid. And I'd probably just like move on. But if I was to be affirming, I'd say, that's a great idea. That's probably exactly what happened. That would be dumb. Like, everyone would know that's dumb.
Yeah. And in her story, and you'll find in others, even before she began testosterone, none of the medical care providers, therapists, etc., looked at any comorbidities. The fact that she had mental health issues prior and then during, and we see that a lot. They're not, those comorbidities or any other issues that they might have been facing are not explored or treated prior to starting any type of medical transitioning, which is also very scary.
Well, and this is being reversed in place, not reversed, but like the trending the other direction in places like Finland, right? Like, they've made some strides.
Yeah.
I know that Johns Hopkins was mentioned as being the first to provide sex reassignment surgery, and then they stopped because of all the issues they were having, and then they got enough money and political pressure to open back up in the face of mountains of evidence to the contrary, and longitudinal studies about this is not helping people. It's actually leading to higher rates of suicidal ideation. I mean, are you seeing trends on the national level towards sanity?
Yes and no.
Well, let's start with the no. Let's end on a high note, I guess.
Yes, I am. And the thing is really every day we have to remain hopeful in the work that I do, or else it can become discouraging. But in reality, no. I was just speaking with Aaron Friday, who is a parent and a lawyer here in the state of California, who is working to add a ballot initiative to the next election to protect kids in California. And it aims to do three things. It aims to keep girls' spaces safe, like sports, from males. It aims to keep to where schools cannot keep it a secret if they are transitioning a child socially. And then also it just aims to completely eliminate medical transitioning for minors. And so I follow her on Twitter. I encourage anyone who's in the state of California to sign that bill, but I'm encouraged with how many people I'm seeing signing this, right?
Good.
People from
Yeah.
all nationalities, of all political spectrums. I think she's a Democrat. But just that's encouraging, right? So we have parents, we have grassroots initiatives trying their darndest to stop this. And I think once you get parents pissed off enough, we'll get there. So I'm also seeing that. I'm seeing parents rally. I'm getting phone calls from people who want me to come to their school board meetings to talk about this reality of biology. And so I'm encouraged there. I'm encouraged because I see detransitioners, and I'm going to use that word in quotes because some folks don't like that word.
Yeah.
But we see people who've been lied to and manipulated, and they're coming out and they're suing. And that is a huge, big step. We need people to do that. And it does take, I know they don't like to be called, many of them I talk to don't like to be called brave, but it does take a certain amount of bravery. You are sharing such intimate details about your life and your personal story and your medical history. So I think we just need to really band behind these men and women and young children who are desisting and detransitioning, and help them get the legal counsel that they need so that they can sue the crap out of these people to stop it. Which we're seeing at a national level. We see people doing that internationally as well. Richie is in our film, and he is also suing and taking legal action across the pond. And so I think there are strides being made. Absolutely. I am encouraged. I think it's going to be slow, but I think we're going to get there. I do. And I think eventually people are going to be upset if they're on the wrong side of this. They're going to be on the wrong side of history.
I would hope so. I mean, it really does seem like common sense that this is a bad thing. But then on the same token, it's absolutely true that there is no proper side of the political spectrum on this.
Right.
Because I've obviously seen liberals who are on the far left just pushing this narrative that's completely not on par with reality and hurting people. But then on the right, I'm also seeing, especially libertarians, saying, well, people can do whatever they want, and as long as it's not hurting me or anyone else, go for it. That's why I asked you the question about adults versus kids and consent, because I don't think that adults who have mental health issues can give consent to do something that's intrinsically wrong. Yeah. So there's problems on both sides. For anyone listening, like, don't think, well, if we just vote Republican, everything will be no, absolutely not. I'll give an example of that. Like here in the state of Arizona, where I am, we have better roads than California. I just want to put that out there. Anyway,
probably better drivers.
I don't know. There's a lot of Californians in Arizona now. Just kidding. But like when you're driving through Palm Springs, like that direction from Arizona to California, the roads get just awful once you go over the border. But anyway, that's not what I wanted to bring up. My point was in Arizona, in the House, a bill was recently brought up by a Republican representative to be able to murder illegal immigrants on folks' property. Like if they think that there's an illegal immigrant on their property in South Arizona, then they can just shoot them and kill them, and there would be no issue. Now, that bill didn't pass, thankfully. But you can't stay, like, no one should be able to think that's okay.
Right.
On an intuitive level. And on the same token, I also don't think it's okay to chop off perfectly good body parts. I definitely don't think it's okay to do that with children. So it's like there's certain things that I feel like everybody just needs to take a step back, take a breath, and realize that this is not a partisan issue. It's a human issue. And we'd be in a lot better position to make good policy decisions. So it's wonderful to hear that your center has people who come from all different backgrounds working towards this cause of, I'm going to call it common sense. So that's good. That's hopeful.
Yeah. Well, like you said, it's a bioethical issue as well. And, one that we care deeply about. We want to protect our kids in the day.
Well, and that definitely affects everything, right? If you are not protecting the most vulnerable in society, then where does it stop? I mean, it keeps going up. And eventually, if no one's pushing back, then the people who are speaking the loudest and pushing the hardest are going to be able to pass whatever they want. And it's just going to keep getting worse, moving towards some sort of better future in their mind. But for the rest of the world, it doesn't seem like that's the right direction. So anyway, I think this book is incredibly important, and I would recommend everyone who's listening to go and buy it. The Detransition Diaries by Jennifer Law and Kallie Fell from Ignatius Press. You can pick this up at Ignatius Press, Amazon, everywhere. I mean, it's all over the place. So definitely go pick up a copy. But Kallie, where else can people find your work and anything that you'd like to mention?
Sure. Yeah. I think first, I just want to encourage people to go watch the films. They're a little under an hour each. We have films on other topics as well, not just this, but all of them can be found for free on YouTube at CBC-Network. That's our YouTube handle. And then if you don't want to go there and you just want to look through our website, that's cbc-network.org. You can find our podcast. You can find lots of articles we've written, letters we've written to legislation on topics, all kinds of things. If you don't see something that you think we need to be talking about or you need answers to, you can email me. My email is kallie.fell@cbc-network.org. But yeah, I just encourage anyone to watch the film, share them with your friends. I think it's a easy way to learn more about this and learn from people who actually are living this.
And that is really, really important to hear what people are actually saying that they've actually been through.
Right.
Because one thing I want to say that I meant to mention earlier, because I think it's important to mention, is that these are real human beings that are dealing with real issues. And I think oftentimes we think about it in ideological terms of, well, I'm opposed to this idea or I'm opposed to this policy. But like you brought up this idea of how many kids am I going to have one day? Well, we have no idea what's going to happen. You can have a desire or a wish, but there's no guarantees. Life is very up and down and tumultuous. And for these people that you write about in the book, they were sold a false bill of goods. They were lied to. They were manipulated. They thought that they were receiving care when in fact they were being, in many ways, irreparably harmed. And thankfully, I think a lot of them have found hope and found support, especially through the good work that you're doing. So thank you for that. It's just so important to treat people as people and to see them as persons.
Yeah. You hit on a really good point. All of the folks that I have interviewed or had the pleasure of speaking with, they are just incredibly resilient, articulate, and hopeful. I don't know that I could have walked through what they did and still remain as positive and hopeful and move on with my life as they have. So kudos to each of them despite this.
Awesome. Well, Kallie, thanks for the conversation. It's been a lot of fun. And thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. And for those listening, please do go to gooddistinctions.com, become a subscriber for free or paid. If you want to see more of these great interviews and conversations, please support the work that we're doing there. Good Distinctions are the spice of life. Kallie, thanks for joining me.
Thank you.